Peace, peace, peace. Peace and Black Power family. Welcome to another episode of Do Knowledge Radio, place where knowledge is born. This is your host, Knowledge Born Allah, and we got a long awaited, highly
Yes, sir.
anticipated sit down, long overdue, but everything is done according to its proper season. You see what I'm saying? So tis the
Indeed.
season. You understand what I'm saying? So I got my brother, um, African Centered Scholar here to impart some timely information and according to the season that we in. So without any further ado, it becomes my honor and privilege at this time to welcome to the platform, no stranger here, um, but always welcome, my brother Carlos Deandre is in the building.
Appreciate
Peace,
you,
brother. What's
Miles.
going on?
Appreciate you, bro. First of all, I want to give all praises to the Creator, and give a special thanks to you, bro. It's been definitely long overdue. It's been some years we built our relationship, and
Right.
man, it's just been a blessing for me. You know, you always pushing me and always checking on me. And I tell you, yeah, I'm almost ready. I'm almost ready. I'm almost ready. Some years go by, and look at it. We here. We here now. I'm
Right.
ready.
Right.
So definitely appreciate you, bro. This is my favorite topic here, always.
Right.
So I definitely want to start off with this controversial topic. Were the ancient Israelites
Mm.
I've been a part of the African Hebrew Israelite community, so you kind of know what my stance is on that. But it's also a topic. This topic has a lot of implications. It's controversial. It has political, social, and religious, or if you want to say spiritual implications to it. But it's not the reason why. It's a controversial subject. But one of the main reasons why I'm talking about this subject is because I wrote a book on the topic. I got an upcoming publication coming out in springtime in May. Shout out to Third World Press, Dr. Hakeem Abuti, all the staff at Third World Press, Rose, uh, uh, Miss Fox, the editor, everybody. My upcoming publication is called Israel's African Ancestry, the Ethnic
Mm.
and National Genesis of the Israelites. Look for that in May. So this particular session or episode that we're doing is really like a promo. I'm trying to build some content before we get to that point, dropping the book. So I appreciate you for having me on. We've worked together in the past, did some great things, and definitely appreciative, bro.
So kind of paint us a picture. This is years in the making. This your baby. You understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah. This is the baby. This is the
Yeah.
baby. Well, my background, uh, like I said, I'm part of the African Hebrew Israelite community for almost 20 years now. Wow, I mean, just to say this, 20 years. Wow. I moved to Israel maybe about 16 years ago, 17 years ago, and I've been traveling the world for the last 20 years. I've been traveling the world. I've been to Africa, Egypt, been to Israel, all over the Middle East. Uh, Not only have I traveled, also educated. I got an undergrad degree in education in Chicago because I'm originally from Chicago. Uh, but I also got an MA in history. When I moved to Israel, I continued my studies, studied history of the Middle East or Near Eastern studies. I got my MA degree, and I've been doing field research and building content for the book for 10 years. So, man, this is definitely my baby, and I put a lot of hard work into it. And so I'm looking forward to that date. Like I said, shout out to Third World Press, Dr. Haki for believing in me. So he's one of the major Black publishers. He's probably the top publisher company. He got the top Black publishing company in the States. So, I mean, it's big things, brother Knowledge. Yes, sir.
So if you can kind of reflect on your experiences in travel, how has, things changed with you, and how do you think, some of these things can impact, some of our brothers and sisters in the diaspora in regards to travel? How has travel shaped your mentality and, your research?
That's a good question. Traveling takes the myth out of everything.
Mm.
It takes the mythology out of everything. Things become much more real, especially when this particular subject, because I want to stay on subject, when you talk about Israelite history, the Bible, and all of these different things, if you don't travel to Israel and you don't see the sights and kind of feel it and travel around the land, understand the geography, it's kind of hard for you to kind of realize um, biblical narrative, so to say. But when you come here, you learn the land, you learn the geography, man, it kind of opens up your eyes, definitely in a different light. And, that's one thing, but just history in general, because, the Middle East and being in Northeast Africa is not just about the Bible history. There's a lot of other history in this land. So it definitely opens your eyes. Like I said, it takes the mythology out of everything, makes everything much more real. Indeed. I got a chance. I've been traveling back and forth to Egypt for about, I say, wow, 10 years, about 10 years since I did my MA. And like I said, that opened up that kind of further opened up my eyes. It's like, wow, if you haven't been to Egypt, you haven't been to Israel, and you're talking about these different subjects, and you're on here talking about you conscious, man, listen, you got to make the travel because, I mean, hearing and reading about it is one thing, but actually experience it, going into those temples, seeing what's written on the walls, it takes you to another level. So that's what traveling has done. It definitely takes you to another level. It makes you kind of up your game up a bit because you always, like when I travel, I always learn something different. Always interacting with, whether it be a tour guide or some, learning different information from them. So always travel, up your game up a little bit. Like I said, you're Israelite, travel to Israel, come here and see what the sites is. Come on the ground, check out the community in Dimona, come to Iraq, come to different places, and like I said, kind of get all that information. And if you into the chematology, definitely go to Kemet and do the same thing, because I don't have an issue. I know there's this issue between the Kemet and Israel. I've never had that issue. So I see it. I see it as family. I don't see it as two different things like that. We all family. We all African at the end of the day, and that's what I hold strong on. That's what this presentation is about. It's about that unifying our people, bringing us back to what the Israelites call an Edenic culture. Because before we were Israelites, we were somebody. Before there was Israelites, there was some. There was a people, and who were they? So you talking about you're an Israelite, but there were people that existed before Israel became a nation. Who were they? Were they God's people too? Of course they were. We're going to get into all that. So I'm ready to get started. Let me go right into it. Why I chose this topic. The inclination to associate the ancient Israelites with Asia is of a Eurocentric geographical consequence, simply based on flawed and unchallenged Eurocentric geography. Basically, what I'm saying is all these years that they've been calling the ancient Israelites Asiatic, that's all Eurocentric, based on flawed concepts of geography and basically geographical concepts that was developed by Europeans. Who said Africa stopped at the Sinai? Nobody said that, but the Europeans created those. They were the cartographers that created that false geography. And so we're going to get into that. It's completely unscientific, and it irresponsibly ignores the self-identity awareness of the Israelites themselves. The notion that the biblical Israelites were Asiatic is surely not consistent with their self-conception and self-perception expressed in their own scripture. The Israelites were aware of the landmass that they were orientated with, or their origins, the landmass that their primordial ancestors came from. And that's written in their own scripture. And that's what we're going to get into. We're going to get a lot into that. Not only are they associated with the African landmass, and they know this, and they knew this, but you see the Africanness of the Israelites. It's all in their ethos. You know, it's all in their culture. You see it, and if you study in the artifacts of the Israelites, when you ever come to Israel, you go into the museums, you'll see African iconography all over the Israel. I mean, you'll see the iconography in the artifacts. You'll see it in the artifacts. So that's the reason why I chose this topic, because the whole idea that the Israelites is Asian is false. It's false. Now, when we were posting the link and the flyer, I want to get into some preface the presentation by making a few comments in regards to the Bible, because I had posted it. Knowledge. I had posted it in the House of Consciousness webpage. I had a few Afrocentrics. They made a comment. They said, "I hope you don't use the Bible as a document to prove what you're saying." And of course, at first, when I decided to do the presentation, I wasn't going to use the Bible much. I was going to go straight academic with it, with the artifacts and this and that, and the primary sources. And then I kind of changed my mind. I was like, that might be a little too complex. Let's stick with the Bible, what people kind of accustomed to, and it probably is easier, to kind of go along with if you a novice or haven't really done in-depth research. So he kind of made me change my mind. Then I was like, I'm gonna stick to my guns. Let's start off with this first. Let's start off with the Bible, because whether or not you think the Bible is a historical document is in this particular study is irrelevant. Why? Because the Bible is an extremely important document, whether it's historical, partially historical, or completely a folklore tradition. It's still an important documentation to the imagining and the self-realization of the Israelite people. It sheds light into how the Israelites perceived the world, how they imagined their primordial origins, as well as the primordial history of all humanity. Basically, the Bible is critical in understanding their self-identity on how they viewed themselves. This is critical when you're dealing with ethnic studies. Anytime you're dealing with ethnic studies and you're studying the people, you look at their folklore tradition and you examine it, and it helps you understand who these people are. The Bible is no different. So anybody who had a problem with me using the Bible, I just wanted to put this preface out to kind of neutralize them. Because anytime you're doing academic research about a people, whether their folklore, you believe their folklore is true or untrue, you always use it into examining or psychoanalyzing who these people thought they were and who they were. So I just want to neutralize a few people on that knowledge. Also, it may be some I don't want, I was going to get into, I'll get into about the authorship of the Bible. Now, people may say, well, that you could use it as folklore in that kind of academic way, but who said that Israelites wrote the Bible? That might be a question. Like I said, since I've been posting the flyer and posted the link, I've getting a lot of questions and feedback. So a lot of this stuff I'm addressing right off the bat. If you don't think the Israelites wrote the Bible, I would recommend that you peruse what is called the documentary hypothesis in regards to the authorship of the Bible. It deals with the theory of who edited, who redacted the Hebrew canon, basically. And when you peruse this, you'll find out that there's an abundance of evidence that suggests that the Israelite scribes are indeed the authors of the Hebrew canon. And when we talk about not the Hebrew canon, I'm sorry, the Torah. When you talk about the documentary hypothesis, they're really talking about the Torah, even though they do get into the Hebrew canon, but mostly the Torah. And see what they found out with the documentary hypothesis by examining it, and I'm not going to get into too much of it, that these scribes who existed between the 8th and the 5th century BC indeed either redacted the Bible or created the Bible from their own imagination. But whatever the case is, they were Israelites. And I just want to solidify that, because as I use the Bible, I want to understand that the Bible is from the purview of the Israelites, whether you believe it's true or untrue. So I wanted to say all that. Again, I wasn't going to say all of this, but after I got a lot of comments, I wanted to preface that. All right, you got it?
We got it.
Nah, you got it. All right. I have to shut up everybody before. Now, also, I received a few more comments on some things I want to get into. I'm just going to touch on briefly too. In regards to this term African, right? Some people have a problem with me using the term African. Before I begin, I want to define what is meant by the designation or identity marker of African. Surely I'm not suggesting that the ancient Israelites called themselves African. It is important to note that neither did the ancient Ethiopians or Cushites identify with the modern construct or this identity marker as African. So some people commented and said, oh man, they didn't call themselves African, of course. Well, yeah, the term African perhaps didn't exist at the time, and neither did the Ethiopians, but nobody's making a big deal about it. When we say African, we know what we're talking about. We know that it wasn't probably a word that the Egyptians or the Ethiopians or the Libyans called themselves. It's a modern construct. So the objective of this presentation is determine whether or not the ancient Israelites, my bad. Cut my ring off. My bad. Man, I hope it. I'm on the show right now. I'm gonna call you back. My bad. But the objective of this presentation is determine whether or not the ancient Israelites should be associated or fall under the category of an African people of antiquity based on modern, social, and academic perspectives of race and ethnicity. I'm going to say that again. The objective of this presentation is to determine whether or not the ancient Israelites should be associated or fall under the category of an African people of antiquity based on modern, social, and academic perspectives of race and ethnicity. So we're looking, we know the term African, they didn't call themselves Africans. We clear that the Cushites didn't call themselves African. But tons of research on African studies has been built off the ancient Ethiopians. So the same, so it doesn't really matter whether they call themselves African. African is a geopolitical term used to identify people that live on the African continent. There's some sub-characteristics that go with that as well. Africans speak of certain languages that fall under the African language families. And also people who express general cultural aspects associated with African civilization are considered, for the most part, African. So that's when I'm using the term African, I'm using it in its modern sense. And basically, this presentation is about, should we call the ancient Israelites Asiatic, African, European? Which one should we call them? So that's the objective here, to determine which group, under the rubric, what do they fall under? For years, we've allowed Eurocentric scholars to call them Asiatic without any contest. So I'm saying, no, we got to contest that, because they were not Asiatic. They were African. And so let's get into it. Let's find out what the Israelites, how did they identify themselves? And so if we want, I think it's fitting that we start off in the beginning. We go right into their creation story. In the second chapter of Genesis, it talks about a place called Eden, which is the primordial homeland of the Israelites. This is where they believe their original ancestor came from. Now, some people have pseudoscientific beliefs and think Eden was some type of mythical place. But we could see clearly in the scripture, it has geographical annotations, meaning it has real geographical, there's real geographical references to where it is located in the scripture in second chapter of Genesis. So let's go into, where's this place that the Israelites believe that their ancestors came from? Okay, and let's start off here. So in Genesis 2:8, it says, and the Lord God planted a garden eastward in a place called Eden, and there he put Adam, whom he had formed. Right, so the original ancestor Adam was placed in the Garden of Eden that was planted eastward in Eden. Right, now Genesis chapter 2 verse 10 gives us insight in exactly where the Garden of Eden is located. Okay, it says, a river issues forth from Eden to water the garden, and from there it is divided and becomes 4 headwaters. The name of the first is the Pishon, the one that encircles the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold is good. The name of the second river is the Gihon, the one that encircles the whole land of Cush. Geographical reference there. Cush is the Hebrew word for Ethiopia. It's not just the Hebrew word for Israel, it's the African word for it's the original term for Ethiopia, the authentic term. The name of the third river is the Tigris, the one that flows towards the east of Assyria. Another geographical annotation there, telling you explicitly where these places were located, where these rivers were going forth. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. We know where the Tigris and Euphrates are located. That's those particular rivers are universally known where their locations are. The Gihon, for centuries, scholars have all 1 second now.
All right, family, if you just tuning in, we got our brother Carlos Deandre, and he's breaking down the science in regards to the relationship of the ancient Israelites and their African origins. So tune in. Y'all can leave commentary here. Y'all can leave commentary wherever. So we're just getting into the precursory. We're really about to unpack it. So just, tune in and leave your commentary. Subscribe if you're here, you're watching. You understand what I'm saying? Tell a friend and tell a friend. That is going down. Back to you.
We good? All right, so let's get back to it. So Genesis chapter 2, verses 10 to 14 explains to you where the Garden of Eden is located. It references geographical locations that are several of them are universally known today: the Tigris and the Euphrates, the land of Cush. Also, so if we look at there's only two ambiguous riverheads that are not universally accepted. And that's the Gihon and the Pishon. But for centuries, the Gihon scholars have all concluded that the Gihon is actually the Nile River. I'm gonna say that again. For centuries, scholars have all suggested that the Gihon is the Nile River. Why? Because it explicitly said it encircles the land of Ethiopia. Right? Now the argument always has been, okay, where's this Pishon River? Right? But there's clues to where it is located right there in the scripture. It says the name of the first river is the Pishon, the one that encircles the whole land of Havilah, where there's gold. The gold is good. Now, to me, I mean, when you're talking about what continent has the gold, you're talking about Africa, right? But let's prove that, okay? Because there's other places that got gold, but this particular, I think I'm quoting from the Tanakh. It says the gold is good. It just don't say it's gold, but the gold is good. So, but let's find out what this place called Havilah is. Now, Genesis 10 and 7 says gives you the genealogy of the sons of Ethiopia or the sons of Cush. The second son is called Havilah. So if we go back to Genesis 2 again, when it refers to the Pishon and circles the whole land of Havilah, and then we go to Genesis 10 and 7, we can make the link that Havilah, who's the son of Cush, is more than likely or certainly in Africa. So here we have the Pishon and the Gihon are both in Africa, and then we have the Tigris and the Euphrates. These are the boundaries of the Garden of Eden. Now, since we've solidified that, I just want to make it clear that the Gihon and the Pishon are both the Nile River. Why? Because the Nile River possesses two main tributaries. One is called the White, the other one is called the Blue Nile. Okay? The White Nile is the primary headwater. The Blue Nile is the lesser headwater. Okay? The White Nile is long and rises to the Great Lakes region of Central Africa all the way down to Rwanda. The Blue Nile begins at Lake Tana in Ethiopia, just where the Bible said the Gihon was located. So clearly, the Israelites, the authors of Genesis, were aware, had some type of geographical knowledge. Okay, not only did they have geographical knowledge, they had an understanding to where their ancestors came from. And they're not talking about anything mythical here. They're giving you geographical locations and insights and clues into where it's located. And they said from the Nile to the Euphrates is where the Garden of Eden was located and their first ancestors resided. Okay? So the Nile to the Euphrates. So let's bring this home, right? So the Garden of Eden is just a portion of Eden. It's not the whole land of Eden. It was just a portion because he said he played in a garden eastward in Eden. That means what is west of the Nile River? That's Africa. That's Africa. West of the Nile River is Africa. So the Israelites were referencing a place called Eden. When they were referencing a place called Eden, they were referring to what we modernly call Africa when they was referring to Eden. So again, folklore, whether it's true or not, folklore is important. And now you see why. Because this speaks to what they believe, what they understood about themselves, which is important in realizing who these people were. Okay? So not only how do we can solidify the Garden of Eden location also because it's the same land that the Creator promised Abraham. It's the same land. The Garden of Eden is the same land promised to Abraham. So that's how I could justify the Nile to the Euphrates as being the Garden of Eden, because we see some consistency here, some continuity here later on in the Torah, when Abraham is promised the same land. He said in Genesis 15 and 18, it says, to your descendants I give thee from the brook of the Egypt to the great river Euphrates. That's Genesis 15 and 18. What he promises Abraham. He promises Abraham his ancestral homeland, where his original ancestors came from. That is the promised land. That's Northeast Africa or Northeast Eden, however you want to say it. But if we talking about it, like I said, if we refer to the continent in modern sense, it's called Africa. If you want to say they identical, I have no problem with it. Also, is that clear knowledge? Plain?
Crystal clear. Plain.
Plain. Okay. So I dealt with where they believe their ancestral homeland was, and they believe their ancestors came from a place called Eden, which is consistent with Africa. If you got any more questions on that, please comment, come in. We can further discuss it. But I'm about to move from that topic on to another. Move forward with it. So when you're talking about the history of the Israelites or the primordial history, although it does go back to Adam in the original answer, most scholars, when they talk about the history, they start with the patriarch Abraham. You know, and generally, when they're discussing the Israelite people, scholars generally, they go back to Abraham. Well, let's find out where Abraham was born. And my wife, it's her birthday. She just walked in. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
All right. Let's find out what
Better
Abraham.
get that right. Better get that right.
Definitely. I had to stop for that. So Abraham born, according to the biblical record, born in Ur Chaldea in a place called Shinar. Shinar is the same as Sumer, right? And per the biblical record, it says that during Abraham, when he was born there, there was a Cushite ruler, an Ethiopian ruler that ruled Sumer named Nimrod, right? Genesis 10 and 10. And they said Nimrod actually founded the Sumerian or civilizations of Babel, Erech, Akkad. These are all historical places. Now, according to the Bible, a Cushite or African king founded these places. So when the place that Abraham was born, he grew up under African dominion. The place was under African authority, right? Now, some people will say, well, let's find out what history. Let's get into the facts of that. Could that be true? This is biblical historicity now. According to archaeological records, Sumer was founded by Ethiopians. This kind of proves some of the things in the Bible a little bit. So Sumerian literally means black-headed people, right? If you look up the etymology of the term Sumerian, it means explicitly the black-headed people. Now, interestingly, the term Ethiopian in Greek means the burnt-faced people. I'm going to put that again. Sumerians literally mean the black-headed people. The term Ethiopian in Greek means the burnt-faced people. Now that's not a coincidence there, right? So, but if the original excavator of Sumer was a man by the name of Henry Rawlinson. He excavated the first remains of Sumer. And he suggested that the Sumerians descended from Cushites or Ethiopians. In my favorite book, The Intro to African Civilization by John Jackson, if you enter history or you want to learn something about the world or African civilization, get that book, The Intro to African Civilization. It is probably the most comprehensive book on African history there is, written by John Jackson. But in this book, John Jackson notes Henry Rawlinson's statement in regards to the Sumerians, saying that they were originally Cushites, right? He quotes Rawlinson saying, without pretending to trace up to these early Babylonians to their original ethnic source, there are certainly strong reasons for supposing them to have passed from Ethiopia to the Valley of Euphrates shortly before the opening of the historic era. Now that's Intro to African Civilization, page 73. Rawlinson says that the people who founded Sumer were originally from Ethiopia and they migrated to the Valley of Euphrates per, not the Bible, per what his excavation, the data from his excavations, right? He went on further to, now Sir Henry Rawlinson is just no average guy. He's considered the father of Assyriology. So he's considered the father of modern Assyriology. There's Egyptology, right? And then there's Assyriology. Assyriology deals with more of what you call the Near East. He's considered the father of Assyriology. And this is what he said about the original Sumerians. They were Ethiopian, which is consistent with the Bible, right? So he went on further because he dealt with he studied the ancient Sumerian script, and he said it was decidedly Cushite or Ethiopian. He said seemed to be identical with ancient Egyptian or Ethiopic roots. That's per the man who originally excavated, right? So that's consistent with the Bible. So that's confirming that if Abraham was a real person, he was born in either an African state, an African country, an African colony, or an African commonwealth. Wherever the case is, he was born in something African. He was definitely born on an African dominion. If Abraham was a real person and the Bible is true in its content, and was accurate on that point, then he was born in the African continent, not just per the Bible, but per the data and the research that has been done on the ancient Sumerians. So in this presentation, if you haven't already noticed, I want to use land, language, and culture in solidifying our rubric in determining whether or not the Israelites were African or not. Basically, I want to answer or at least touch on three questions. Basically, did the Israelites live in Africa? And also, did their primary ancestors originate from Africa? We've already touched on that, and we're still going to build on that. Now, another question is, did the Israelites speak a language or write a script orientated with African languages? We're going to touch on that. Did the Israelites have a culture similar to the traditional African cultures of antiquity? We're about to touch on that as well. Let's go back to the story of Abraham. So, per the biblical record, the Creator tells Abram to leave Sumer or Shinar and go to a land that he has promised him to make him a great nation. Notice the Creator didn't tell him to go to India or go anywhere in the Far East. The Creator tells him to go in that opposite direction, but to the land of Canaan, right? Per the Bible. In the land of Canaan, Abram, because he's not Abraham yet, goes through several trials, and the Creator changes his name to Abraham, right? The initiation was finalized with him becoming circumcised. From this circumcision circumcision has essentially become perhaps the most important cultural custom of the Israelite or Jews. This custom, but here's caveat: this custom originated in Africa among African people. Circumcision is an African tradition. Africans can take ownership of that, and we're about to get into why. Who was circumcising folks in antiquity? That's the question. Who was circumcising folks in antiquity? In ancient times, who was circumcising people? Now, the Bible says Abraham was circumcised and the Israelites were circumcising, right? But who else was circumcised per historical record? Well, the earliest historical record of circumcision comes from Egypt in the form and image of a circumcision of an adult part on the tomb of Ankh-Mahor at Saqqara, dating 2400 BCE. Circumcision was done by Egyptians, possibly for hygienic reasons, but was part of their obsession with purity and was associated with spiritual and intellectual development, which seems to have been the case with Abraham. Remember, it isn't until he gets his name, he has this introduction with the Creator, right? He goes through these trials, right? And then he gets his name changed, right? This is a spiritual and intellectual development. Well, that's how the Egyptians used circumcision. It was a rite of passage. This is an African custom. So here we see not only them using the custom, but using it properly in the African tradition. Right there in the Bible, right? So just so we clear, the only other ancient people really to practice circumcision, per scholars, right, are Australian Aboriginals. And I don't think anybody's suggesting that the Israelites were Australian. And Aztecs and Mayans. Now, Aztecs and Mayans come from Egypt. that to me is pretty clear. Not only do they come from Egypt, but their pyramids and all that kind of stuff, there has to be some relation with Egypt, with the Aztecs and the Mayans. So I'm not suggesting the Israelites, Aztecs, and Mayans right now, but those were the only three groups in ancient times that practiced circumcision. In antiquity, in early antiquity, that we find. Now, what happens is after Egyptian Empire falls, circumcision becomes, in Africa, it becomes a normal custom. Most of West Africa and North Africa to this day practices circumcision. And then we had the Christians and the Muslim, Christian faith and the Islam faith emerged, and they took circumcision to the Far East. They took it throughout the world. But before them, circumcision was mostly centralized in Africa. So it's an African custom. So here we have Israelites following African traditions, right? Orientated with Africa. Knowledge, we good?
We good. We're good. You understand?
Right.
I'm over here taking notes like everybody else. You see what I'm saying? So like, I'm trying to get my flow on. You know?
Right. Got you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, bro. So I don't need to get into all the African cultures that practice circumcision. You guys can research that on your own. But just know circumcision has always been and still remains an African tradition. It's not related to India, to the Far East, or anything like that. It's not Asiatic. So they can't claim that. It originated African, and Africans have maintained the tradition. And the Israelites adopted it, or they adopted the tradition. So let's go back to the story of Abraham. And like using the Bible for this particular presentation is kind of fun because, I mean, you instead of using the artifacts and the images, is when they say it themselves is when it really comes out. You know, like wow, you know. So back to the story of Abraham. Abraham moves from Sumer under African authority. We're going back to the story of Abraham, right? Abraham moves from Sumer under African authority under Nimrod, right? According per the Bible, to Canaan, among other Africans, per the biblical record. So Abraham, when he moves, migrates, he crosses over, becomes what they call a Hebrew. He moves into Canaan among other Africans, right? Because the Canaanites are African. Per the biblical record, it says their lineage is of the same lineage of Cushites, which is of a person named, in English they call him Ham, in Hebrew it's called Ham, and the Afrocentrics and the Africanists known as Chem is Chemet or Chemet, right? All those words are the same word, but in different languages. So Ham is the same as Ham, who's the same. When you hear the word Chemet, that's all the same. So the Canaanites were what we would call Kemetic per the Bible. All throughout antiquity, but here's an interesting fact about Canaan. All throughout antiquity, Egyptians or the Kemetic kings referred to the land of Canaan as part and partial of the Egyptian empire from the middle to the New Kingdom. When Abraham moved from Sumer to Canaan, he basically was moving from Sumer to Canaan because Canaan was considered by the pharaohs to be their land. You see that in all the documentation if you study Egyptian records, especially during our monarch period, even in the Middle Kingdom. Canaan was considered the outer boundaries of ancient Egypt. So like I said, he moved from Sumer to Kemet. That's why when there was a famine, where did he go? He went to the central location, to the central government. He went into the Nile Valley. When there was a famine, I don't know if you guys, I'm not trying to get in specific to the story. Hopefully you guys are familiar with the Abraham story. There was a famine. If you remember there's a famine, he goes into Egypt for food. And this is when the Pharaoh saw his wife, how beautiful she was, and tried to take her from him, and blah, blah, blah. And then, they resolved that matter. And then he ends up leaving Egypt with a hand servant from the royal court of Pharaoh name. Her name was Hagar, if you guys remember. And according to some Islamic and rabbinic schools of thought, Hagar was an Egyptian princess. Now, I think it called her a slave or something like that. But in some schools of thought, she was an Egyptian princess. Now, knowledge. I'm not watching everything.
What's going on?
No, I just want to know anybody commented about anything thus far.
We good to go.
Okay, cool.
So anybody who's listening got questions or comments, if they're in Facebook, if they're watching from Facebook or any of these other places, you can just type your question or your comment, and I can put it up here. But if you want, you know, our brother to know who it's coming from, you can comment directly through the YouTube. I put the YouTube link out there. The YouTube is live. You come on the YouTube link and, state your question or your comment. So that way I can put it on the screen and our brother can see it and he can address it if it's necessary.
Indeed. I want to make sure everybody got the right link on my end. Give me 1 sec. I sent the link out. Okay. Cool. Let's get
and
back.
I've been sharing it throughout, and I tagged you in one, so you could just go to your joint and let some folks know.
Now, what I was just talking about, when Abraham took an Egyptian woman from the Pharaoh, after there was an incident with Sarah, his wife, they resolved the matter, and the Pharaoh gave him a handmaid, according to the Bible, that was of the royal court. Her name was Hagar. And in some circles, schools of thought and rabbinical and Islamic schools of thought, Hagar wasn't just some slave, but she was a princess. Now, this particular incident is when it get very interesting when you're dealing with ethnic identity of the Israelites. Anyone that studies African civilization should know that traditional African societies, Egypt included, operated under caste rules. Basically, there was a caste system. Now, one of my favorite scholars, I don't agree with everything that he says, but I mean, he is the pioneer of African studies, Sheikh Anta Diop. In his book, Pre-Colonial Black Africa, he presents a significant amount of commentary on the subject of caste system in ancient Egypt. And basically, caste system is basically a hierarchical class structure that regulates marriage, who you can marry, who you could be with. In the caste system, everybody couldn't interact on certain levels. If you are of a higher class, you didn't interact with lower class people. You just couldn't marry anybody. The person had to be of your particular caste. In pre-colonial Black Africa, Sheikh Anta Diop spends a lot of time dealing with this, so you'll understand Egyptian society, not just in the Old Kingdom, not just in the Middle Kingdom, not just in the New Kingdom, but for that entire life, that entire span, Egypt operated under a strict caste system. And there's records to prove all that. So Diop says the caste system arose from a division of labor, but under an advanced political regime, which was monarchic, for one never finds caste where the other. I'm sorry, I misread that. The caste system arose from a division of labor, but under an advanced political regime, which was monarchic, right? He says in finds caste there were nobles. However, it was very probable that the specialization of labor, which led to the hereditary transmission of trades in the caste system on a family or individual scale, evolved out of clanic organization. Basically, he said your job structure, your trade developed. It developed from what it evolved. It involved what your clanship was. What you did, what your role in society was determined where who your parents were, right? That's one of the divisions of the caste. I'm not gonna get too much into it, but he said there were 7 caste groups. There were priests who were the highest caste orders of ancient Egypt. There were warriors, herdsmen, swine herders, tradesmen, interpreters, and pilots. He said there were 7 groups, and the priestly caste was the highest caste order, and you couldn't marry just anyone from the priestly class. definitely, unless you were a nobility and of that caste order. So when it speaks about Abraham, possibly, right? Because in the Torah it doesn't say that explicitly. Possibly marrying an Egyptian princess, we have to ask ourselves who Abraham was, you know. But we don't have to go with Abraham because it does explicitly say that another person did marry somebody of the priestly class, and that was a person named Joseph. It says that Joseph married, who was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, married a priestess of his master, or named Potiphar, right? Now, this is interesting because how is Joseph, who's supposedly a foreigner, go into Egypt and marry a priestess? Under what Diop says is a strict caste order. Protecting bloodlines was sacred in ancient Egyptian society. Egypt not only had a hereditary caste system, but totemism was interwoven into society. So it was a very complex marriage system. Joseph being able to marry an Egyptian priest, that to me, that's a red flag with the Bible, because how does that happen? I've been waiting for Afrocentric to make that make that argument for so long, but nobody ever caught that because nobody really reading their history like that. But again, then we see Solomon, King Solomon, another Israelite, marries an Egyptian princess. Pharaoh gives Solomon his first wife was an Egyptian princess, which is interesting because we have records. Let me get to those records. We have records of pharaohs. Hold on, I'm getting to the records in just a minute. We got records of ancient pharaohs saying that no time immemorial has, okay, Amenhotep III is quoted by a Babylonian king in Amarna letter EA4. He says, from time immemorial, no daughter of a king of Egypt has been given to anyone. See, that highlights the caste, the rigid caste system in ancient Egypt right there. They didn't allow their daughters to just be married to anyone, especially if they were noble. So Hagar, if she was of nobility and married Abraham, Abraham had to be somewhat related to her in some type of fashion. He had to be of the same caste order as her. So definitely Joseph had to be the same caste, of the same priestly caste as his wife. Her name was Asenat. You can look her up. And Solomon as well. Solomon came later, and the argument could be possibly made that maybe the Egyptian caste order was broke down by the time of Solomon. But we still have to consider that this was the custom of Egypt, and that caste system lasted for a very long time, because we have records, even when the Greeks went into Egypt, they spoke about the caste system that was there. That's how we know about the caste system, because when the Greeks went into Egypt, they documented everything. So a lot of, even what Sheikh Antu Diop is talking about, he getting it from Greek scholars who went and talked to Ethiopian and Egyptian priests, and they told him, like, they explained to them their caste system. So that was already, that lasted all the way to the Hellenistic period. So we have to, if we are trying to say that these are historical people, which I do suggest, and you get my book, I explain all of this, how it all works out. But if you're saying that these are historical people, you have to explain how were they marrying these African people of nobility, because African people didn't work, that their marriage system didn't work like that. But I explain that in my book. Get my book, coming out in May. I break all that down, and be assured that there was ethnic relations between the Israelites and these Egyptian nobility. And I break all that down in my book, right? Just like the Egyptians operated on a strict caste system, so did the Israelites, particularly the early patriarchs. Now, within the ancient Egyptian royal families, they married within the family, right? That's the caste system, trying to keep the bloodline secure, so they marry within their family structure. So inbreeding was virtually they in every dynasty, even from the old kingdom to the new kingdom, the pharaohs they practiced inbreeding. They married their half sisters, they married their first cousins. That's just facts. But we see that same dynamic with the early patriarchs. Same kind of cultural tradition. Abraham married Sarah, who's his half sister, per the Bible, Genesis 20 and 12. Remember, Sarah, both of their father was Terah. So he married his half sister. Same custom of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt. Same custom. Similar caste system. Isaac married Rebekah, who was Abraham and Sarah's niece. Right? So you see these caste rules, this caste system being adhered to by the early patriarch. Jacob or Israel marries Rachel and Leah, both were Rebekah's nieces. So there were elements of the caste system during the patriarchal era which mimics the type of caste order in ancient Egypt or Canaan. The cultural overlapping is clear. No way did these biblical characters exist in a vacuum, especially residing in Canaan. Yes, there was some local culture in Canaan or unique cultural aspect, but if you examine the Cushites or the Libyans, they too had local and unique tradition, but they are considered African. Remember, the goal and objective of this presentation is not to paint the Israelites as Egyptians or Ethiopians, but to associate them with Egyptians and Ethiopians, which is a difference. I'm not saying that they're the same people, but I'm associating with them and saying and breaking down a common culture because, again, I'm trying to reorientate the Israelites back to being Africa instead of this Eurocentric notion of them being Asiatic. So far we touched on land and a bit on culture. I'm not going to discuss the relationship between the spiritual system, as I have a chapter in my book called called Exodus Demythologized and the Origins of Yahweh in Egypt. I'll repeat that chapter again. It's called Exodus Demythologized and the Origins of Yahweh or Yahweh in Egypt. Yes, the earliest epigraphic references of Yah derived from the Nile Valley, not Sumer, not Canaan. The earliest references of the Hebrew or the Israelite God Yahweh or Yahweh is referenced in the Nile Valley. It's on the walls of ancient Kemet. I deal with that in my book. Get it. The Shasu of Yahweh depicted on the wall of ancient Kemet. If people don't know who the Shasu are, look them up. You can Google them. There were a group of people that lived in and around Egypt called the Shasu, and they definitely lived in Canaan. They called the Shasu of Yahweh. They were depicted on the walls of ancient Kemet. They definitely were an amalgam of the people that eventually became the nation of Israel. So definitely, I do suggest that the Shasu depicted on the walls of ancient Kemet are the Israelites or are the people who became the Israelites. I will be posting kind of pictures and this type of information on my Facebook page. I know now that you put that in the chat room, the African and Near Eastern Studies Symposium. So if you want to join that Facebook group, I'll be posting information and pictures on that particular page in regards to some of the things I mentioned or may mention. So at this point, I want to touch on the Hebrew language because we dealt with land and we touched on culture. I don't want to get too much more on culture, get my book, and then, like I said, this is really part one. There's a lot more, of course, when you're dealing with cultural aspects, the spiritual system, but I'm not going to get into a lot. that all another time. But let's get into the Hebrew language and see if it orientates with other African languages. Okay. Everything clear knowledge? We good?
We good. We good.
All right. All right. Now, I'm about to explain, well, I'm explaining briefly how the Hebrew script developed per archaeological records. The Hebrew script developed in several stages. And when I'm talking about the Hebrew script, I'm talking about Paleo Hebrew. If you're familiar with the history of the Hebrew language, you know it developed in stages. One of the stages, which is the most, is the Paleo Hebrew, right? The modern Hebrew comes, that's more in modern times, right? But when we talk about Hebrew, we're talking about Paleo Hebrew, which is it's synonymous with Phoenician script. So if you don't understand what those are, look those up, and then just follow or try to follow what I'm saying. In reverse order, you have Paleo Hebrew or the Canaanite script, Proto-Canaanite, Proto-Sinaitic, and then the origins of all three scripts is hieroglyphic. I'm going to repeat that. You have the authentic Paleo Hebrew, and this is the development. And I'm going in reverse of Hebrew. You got Paleo Hebrew or the Canaanite script, the Proto-Canaanite script, the Proto-Sinaitic, and the origins of all three is hieroglyphs. Now, how do we know that? I can trace it using archaeological records, which I'm about to do. If anybody remember, there was a debate. I know you remember knowledge. It was a good debate too. It was between Zion Lex and Shaka Amos. And this was about, I think, what was the subject? It might have been, I don't know if it was on the origins of the Hebrew language, but Zion Lex presented a pretty good presentation, theoretical though. He used a lot of what you call Samuel Kramer's work, who's a Syriologist. He's very used to Eurocentric. Zion Lex was trying to say that the hieroglyphics in Hebrew predated the hieroglyphics. He did an amazing job, even though he was wrong. he did a really good job. But he didn't show the forensics. And that's what he lost. He was theoretical with it. He tried to show you how the signs were similar, and he kind of finessed it a little bit. But the forensic trails is very clear. We traced the Paleo Hebrew through an archaeological trail. And based on the archaeological trail, we can actually reconstruct the migration and the development of the Hebrew script originating in the Nile Valley. We first see the morphology of the Egyptian hieroglyphs into the Proto-Sinaitic script, beginning with what they call the Wadi El Hall inscriptions. In 1999, the Wadi El Hall inscriptions were found in the Middle Egypt by John and Deborah Darnell. These inscriptions on a small sphinx are the oldest inscriptions of the Proto-Canaanite Sinaitic or Sinaitic script in which the Hebrew language directly derives from. The dating of the development of the Proto-Sinaitic writing is from the 19th to the 18th century BC. So let's start there. The oldest variation of the Hebrew script was found in a place called Wadi al-Ha. That's in Middle Egypt. Not in the Sinai. We're talking about in Middle Egypt. I think it's near Middle Egypt would be somewhere around Luxor. So we're talking about in the heart of Egypt. That's the oldest variation of what we call the Paleo Hebrew script was found. And that's in the 19th century BC. And then from Wadi al-Ha, we see the inscriptions develop even more because we see them about a century later in a place called Serabit el-Khedem, which is in Sinai. We see these same inscriptions, but they move. Linguistic scholars determine that there's a slight variation from when they moved from the Middle Kingdom to the Sinai. They moved from a hieroglyphic style of writing to an alphabet when they get to the Sinai, more of an alphabet, right? So they track the morphology of the language. We see a migration and the development and evolution of the language. Within a century or so, we see that development based on archaeological records. So we see the evolution at Sarabit el Canaan, which is in the Sinai, and the language kind of morphs into an alphabet style. And then a century, and that's in the 17th century at Sarabit el Canaan. A century after that, then we begin to see the Proto-Canaanite script evolve in Canaan. We see it move each century from 18, 17 to the 16th century. We see it move from the Middle Kingdom of Egypt into Canaan. Just like that. Just like that. Per archaeological record. I posted on my Facebook page the Wadi El Hall inscription that was found there. I need to post the ones that serve at El Khedr and kind of show you the morphology. Again, a lot of this, what I'm talking about, deserves a visual presentation. But, you know, I'm just introducing this topic to you guys. So hopefully you can follow it. So we see it move from the Middle Kingdom to Sarabit el Khedr to Canaan. That, in all this evolution proves, this migration proves that the language originated in Africa, in the Nile Valley. That, I mean, the script at least. Now, people can say, well, what about how the language sound? I mean, when you're a linguistic scholar and you're dealing with the inscriptions or the letters themselves, we know the sound developed from the logographs. So it's safe to say that that the Hebrew language got its sound, its phonemic variation from Egypt as well. So the language definitely came from Egypt. So again, we have the Israelites, per their biblical record, referring to their ancestors coming from Africa, or this place called Eden, which I already proved to you that Eden is synonymous with Africa. It is the ancient or the Hebraic concept, or the Hebraic construct of what we call Africa today. I broke down some of the cultural things. In fact, there's abundance more I could have broke down this cultural thing. But again, I don't want to talk for hours about this. And some of these things deserve visuals, right? But we talked about the circumcision. We talked about some of the marriage system we saw. How they were marrying a cousin, which was synonymous with the caste orders of ancient Egypt. And then again, we see that language, per archaeological records, derived from Africa. So land, language, and culture, it's a lot. You know, it's a lot. Land, language, and culture, if we use that as the rubric, the Israelites should be orientated with Africa. Now, I would love to see somebody do a presentation, knowledge, and try to show me, use my rubric, land, language, and culture, and show me how the Israelites should be associated with Asia. I would love for them to do that. I think it's virtually impossible. I'm sure you can pseudo it a little bit. You know, you can find some things where the Israelites are similar to people in India, you know, but it's gonna get real pseudo when you do that. You're not gonna be able to do it scientifically. You're gonna use a lot of pseudo knowledge with that, you know, and you may find a little thing, but you won't be able to do a comprehensive study trying to associate the Israelites with Asia. The only comprehensive study that can be done if you associate them with Africa. So, knowledge.
Yep.
Let's go ahead and conversate about it. I got a few more things I want to touch, but I want to fill them in.
Okay. So kind of give us like your reference in the book. So kind of give us like a little breakdown in regards to expectations. What people can expect. Like what's your intent? What's your vision? For the book. What's some of the takeaways?
Well, with the book, I expound on most of this content, not all. The vision of it is to begin an academic discussion on this topic, and I wanted to the set the stage for developing this in a broader sense. So I think the book is going to set the foundation for us to look at not only Israelites in a different fashion, but the Middle East in general and all the civilizations of the Middle East in a different way, or the so-called Middle East, so-called Middle East. So that's the vision: is basically changing the game, expanding Afrocentrism, getting Afrocentrics to stop being narrow-minded and stop allowing Eurocentrics to take away what essentially is African. Uh, Many years, Afrocentrics have allowed Eurocentric scholars to, they allowed them to take the Middle East away from Africa. I mean, and I hate to say, I mean, people like Sheikh Anta Diop and John Henry Clark, they, I mean, John Henry Clark has a quote in one of his books where he said he didn't care if the Hebrews were African or not. He didn't care. It wasn't a concern for him. Sheikh Anta Diop, all of his books, he uh he goes. I mean, he's a great scholar when it comes to Africa, but when he talks about the Near East, he uses all the Eurocentric misnomers. He calls them Semites, half white people, half black people. He he fell right into the trap, and he again, Duopian thought is a critical school of thought in Afrocentric, and it's really the problem why the Middle East was basically given away, because Diop didn't think the Middle East was important, and said that if Africans wanted to gain their credibility back in the world, they should just focus on Egypt. That was his school of thought, and a lot of Afrocentrics fell into that trap, and allowed, even India. You go back to the ancient origins of India, you're gonna find African people, you know, and the Afrocentrics, they touched on it. There were Afrocentrics like John Henry Clark, John Jackson, others that did speak to those things, but they never really spoke to the things enough to where it was really challenging some of the Eurocentric misnomers. So one of the things I want to do in the book is again challenge the Eurocentric misnomers, and really challenge the Afrocentric to now think beyond the Sinai, think beyond Egypt. There's a lot of more African civilizations that existed beyond Egypt. So that's one of the goals and objectives there.
All right. So aside from some of this obvious stuff, I would say that a lot of this information has been shrouded, from our people, like very shrouded. If we didn't interact, if we didn't get a chance to, build these relationships, a lot of this information for us is hidden in plain sight. So now you add that, and then you start filtering, through relationships. You see what I'm saying? It's
Mm-hmm.
especially in this community, we have the jaded view of a jaded view. You see what I'm saying? And a lot of parroting takes place without any research. You see what I'm saying? So How do you find yourself in a way to kind of circumnavigate those waters when dealing with people who are simply unlearned and they're genuine? You understand what I'm saying? And what the course pattern is, but they just like they baseline unlearned. You know what I mean?
It's our job, and that's why I kind of kept trying to keep it simple today. It's our job to kind of start simple and make the information for the novice, and not make it complex. We have to make it simple first, and then kind of get into the complexities of the matter. So that's why I kind of kept it simple today, because I wanted people who are not aware of this particular topic to learn something and to build from there through their research. So it's really up to the jobs of the teachers to be able to convey in simple terms what's necessary. So it's definitely not the students' fault or the listeners or the novices. It should be, it's on the teachers.
All right. And so I got two questions. Well, I got a couple of questions from my brother Ben Kyle. You know what I'm saying? Ben Real over here playing around. You know, he could have just got the link and came in. You see what I'm saying? But he playing around over here. We let him
Cool.
we let him play in the audience. Ben Kyle. So you see the question?
Oh yeah, I got it. I'm sorry.
All right.
How do we propose this shift in identity will change the landscape of the conscious community? Well, um, that's a good question, because the conscious community right now is dominated with, to me, it's really just become entertainment. They've kind of moved into entertainment instead of real discourse. And for me, I think platforms like knowledge and people like knowledge people like knowledge, solid people that have the intention of getting information out, not in a disruptive manner, but more so in a building manner. Uh, those people have to get involved in the conscious community, because right now it's more of an entertainment thing, and people, even when they have discussions, they're more looking for to be entertained. You know, they may get some knowledge from it, but it's become more like the WWF with names and gimmicks and things like that. But it's really not scholastic right now. You know, it's more for show. That's why they have more sit downs, regular sit downs. Because if it was really about something, I don't know, like when you if you saw the debates with John Henry Clark and back in the day when the real scholars was teaching and they was teaching history. I mean, Ivan that certain when you seen them guys teaching and they was debating people, man, it was at the utmost professional type level. You know, it wasn't no gimmicks and it wasn't no street stuff. You know, they was using real information and debating. It was just on another level. So until those kind of people get involved in the conscious community is going to be as is, and we need more writers. You know, we have a lot of people talking and not a lot of people writing. You know, and I think that's another level of bringing the conscious community up a few levels. You know, because right now anybody who could really get the gift of gab and got a little knowledge can get in here and become popular. I mean, you ain't got to really know much. You can internet research and all day and come up with things to say. And you don't have to be a real scholar. As in back in the day, if you was going to get involved in debates and stuff like that, you had to know what you was talking about.
All right, let me get to this next question.
Mikael, man, you can always count on him to ask intellectual questions, boy. Man. What is the identity should relate to current issues that play Africa on content and diaspora? This particular subject related to the development and evolution of Africa. Well, I mean, you see social and cultural deterioration in Africa. That's prevalent. You see more Westernization in Africa right now. You see Africans wanting to be Western. So, and a part of that is just ignorance. A lot of them are ignorant of their history, where they come from, and sometimes they ashamed of it because they're looking at more of the last 200 years rather than the last 2,000 years, and that's the issue. And if we get back to teaching the ancient history of African civilization, I think it gives African people the impetus to become more broader in their thinking and come back more to their culture, because they have to see their culture in its glory rather than think about or be ashamed of its recent past. So if anything, if this subject could help in that way, and, you know, studying ancient Canaan, studying ancient Israelite history, studying all African civilization should give them a boost of pride of who they should be. So and what they should become. So, you know, that's what the social sciences is all about. It's about motivating, you know. So if that answers your question, I tried to answer your question the best way it can, but you know. Eurocentrism. Eurocentrism, man. I mean, they're the culprits. They purposely tried to reconstruct history in their favor because their history, there's a lack of history when it comes to that. And if they can get as much history as they can, they will. And the Afrocentrics, like I said, they allowed them to take the history of the Middle East. And so they took it, you know, and they would take Egypt. They want to take Egypt. And they did. They tried to take Egypt. I'm sorry, they tried to take Egypt. But the Afrocentrics fought back and said, no, you can't have Egypt, but you got the rest of the other places. And then so they took it. So that's why it's been obscured, because of the Eurocentrics and their desire to have a history beyond ancient Greece, you know. So that's what it's been. That's why it's obscure.
All right, that's the questions that we had. So you said there was some other things you wanted to hit on before we wrap it up?
Yeah. I sure did.
Okay.
There was also knowledge. I wanted to get into the term Africa, because there's the etymological roots. Because interesting enough, there's an urban legend about the term Africa. And it's a popular belief that it's named after a Roman general, right? Scipio Africanus. You heard about that, right?
Yeah, I heard that.
Right. A lot of people, when they want to say, oh, you know, they hate the term Africa, they'll tell you, oh, it's named after some white general, Roman general. Well, that's an urban legend. Scipio Africanus was born Publius Cornelius Scipio. After defeating Hannibal and the Carthaginians at the Battle of Zama during the Punic Wars, Scipio was given the surname Africanus. So he was not born with that name. Only when he defeated a people in the land called Afar was he given the surname Africanus. I wanted to clear that up. Somebody mentioned that in one of the comments about me using the term Africa. So I wanted to let them know that Africa, the term Africa, is not European. Maybe the suffix is Rica, but Afar, the root word of Africa, is guess what? It's Hebrew. Yeah, the root of the term Africa is Hebrew. There are several theories in regards to its relationship with the Hebrew language. One was presented by Josephus. Josephus proclaimed in his book Antiquities of Jews, he said that the Africa was named after the grandson of Abraham, which name was Afar. This is per Josephus. Now, I'm not a big Josephus fan because some of the things that he said have been proven to be not true. But to give him credit, there are some things that he said that have proven to be accurate. So, he had to take what Josephus said with a grain of salt. But he said the name Africa was named after the grandson of Abraham in the Antiquities of the Jews, right? Afar, right? And there's also another theory in his relation to his Hebrew origins that it comes from a Hebrew word called Ophir, right? Ophir is a place or region mentioned in the Bible. King Solomon is said to have received gifts, apes, ivory, and gold, which makes it clear that that Ophir was a place in Africa. Apes, ivory, gold, and silver from a place called Ophir. This is per Bible, 1 Kings 10th chapter, 22nd verse. So one of the professors at Rutgers University, he proposed that the term Africa is indeed Hebrew and indeed comes from a Hebrew root, Ophir, which is interesting. But what Josephus and his professor said is true or not, what is very clear is that the word afar which is the root of the word Africa, is definitely a Hebrew word, and it refers to northern Africa, because the word afar actually means sand or dust. And if you look at northern Africa, what is its geographical landscape? It's the Sahara Desert, and it's sand and dust. So the region, even during the time of Scipio's, the Roman general Scipio, who conquered North Africa, during his time it was called Afar. So when he conquered it, he became Scipio Africanus. So I wanted to make that clear that Africa didn't get its name from him, and that if you didn't know, now you do know that the term itself is rooted in the Hebrew language. If that is of any value. That's it.
So the book is coming out in May. So you
Yes,
got
it
some
is.
plans for some lectures, some talks, some web series,
Oh man.
somewhere where people can interact with you.
I'm coming to the States because I live in Iran, Israel. I didn't say that. I live in Israel. But I'm coming to the States in May. And once the publication comes out, you per you know per the publishing company, I got to make sure how many copies I get. Once I get on the numbers of how many I get to start with, to determine how far, how fast I'm gonna be moving. You know, because I ain't moving without no product. You know, so once I get the publication and the numbers done, how many books we gonna have, and how many we starting off with, because they always set a limit to how many books they're gonna publish. Then I'll determine, how I'm gonna move. If I'm gonna be moving everywhere, if I got a lot of product, I'm be moving. If I don't, then I have to change the way I move. So definitely I'll be in the States. I'll definitely be in Chicago. I already kind of linked up with people there, bookstores, people I need to know to get uh, my book out there. And I'm definitely going to be working with you uh, while I'm there or in the meantime. We could do part two of this. Again, there's lots more information to share. I kept it real simple on purpose. So, a novice person could understand and see the correlation.
Right. Yeah, so I definitely want to offer the platform. Want to do a series, whatever you want to do. You see what I'm saying? You already know. I'm here to support you, and I want to see, the information get out and grow, because there's a psychology associated with an identity crisis. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just an identity crisis alone. You're dealing with amnesia. You're dealing with trauma. You're dealing with um, what you call it, a detachment disorder, all of these things associated with not knowing who you are. You see what I'm saying? And you could put yourself in a state of resentment to where it's you against your bloodline, you know, because the key aspects of what you were talking about was a renewal of family history. You see what I'm saying? And that's the essence and the core of it. So with a renewal of your family history, it's a reconnection to your bloodline and your family culture. You see what I'm saying? So like
Mm-hmm.
these things aren't topically you could play, little games, semantically and stuff like that. And I see how folks are able to capitalize on it. But in essence, you're defending family culture, your family name. You know what I mean? So respect to the culture and family name. This is, something that African people hold in high regard. You know what I mean? So that's that essence right there is the doorway based off our relationship. You see, it's always been a mutual regard and respect. So I've been waiting for the book like everybody else. You see what I'm saying? So I'm ready to see. You know what I'm saying? I'm ready to get my copy so we can get to that textbook. You see what I'm saying?
Man,
And then we
it's coming,
get
bro.
critical.
I'm on part two. I'm on part two of the book now, man. And again, hold on, because I didn't really talk. I spoke on the book. What the book really represents is a complete reconstruction of the biblical record. What I do is
Hmm.
I take the whole, well, not the whole Bible. I take from the creation story all the way up into the monarchical period, beginning with King David and Solomon, and I reconstruct all that history per historical records. So basically, I find the historicalness that of that particular period, from the creation story to the monarchical period, and I put it in historical context because uh, if anybody knows anything about biblical scholarship, they have not been able to prove that anything before the monarchical period of Israel, they kind of haven't been able to prove anything historical. They basically wrote it off as being a non-history or what they call ahistorical. So what I've done is I've looked at it from an Afrocentric perspective, and in doing that, I've been able to do what they have not been able to do or were not willing to do because they were trying to paint the Israelites as being European. And in doing that, they were never able to find them because they was looking for Europeans. The whole time they was looking for a non-African people, what they quote unquote call Shemitic, right? Per the biblical record, they saw the table of nations, and it does make a distinction. But what I do in this book is I clarify what that distinction meant, what it means to be a Shemite, what it means to be, what these actually meant in antiquity. Because I would ask anybody to go into historical record and find where anybody calls themselves a Shemite. Go and find me any historical records. You find me anything anywhere where somebody said that they were a Shemite. If Shemite was, you know what I'm saying? Now I do it, but again, I'm coming from an Afrocentric perspective, so I understand. I'm going to explain what Shemite is. So I'm not saying Shemites didn't exist. That's not what I'm saying. But I tell anybody to go on historical record and find out what Shemites meant, and it didn't mean what they think it meant. And I'm not going to get into it because that's in the book, and that's for another day. And to me, that's the bread maker in the book. To me, is explaining what a Shemite actually was, and it wasn't a half white person. It had nothing to do with race. It had nothing to do with race. And so I break that down in my book. So I'm kind of glad that I kind of touched on this because it's important, you know. So I reconstruct that whole history. I even find biblical characters or renditions of biblical characters in historical records. Characters that Europeans have failed to find. So I deal with that in my book. So I definitely want to miss. I kind of miss saying that. So I'm glad I've got an opportunity to come back and say that because again, this is definitely a promotional piece, trying to promote and build upon selling this book and getting it out there. Once it come out, man, I mean, I'm gonna be more free flowing. Right now, I'm not letting the waters flow all the way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I understand. So, final remarks, acknowledgments, shout outs, plug the book one more time. Let them know where they can get it, how they can support you. All of those things, all of that.
The book is called Israel's African Ancestry, the Ethnic and National Genesis of the Israelites, and is scheduled to be published in the spring by Third World Press. And check Third World Press website out right now. Like I said, they're one of the premier Black publishing companies in the States right now. You can look at their websites, going by if you want to get books on Black history or any kind of books on conscious or related to the Black consciousness. Go to Third World Press, get their books. They're online. They have their own website. So it's Third World Press Publishing in Chicago. Again, shout out to their whole staff and everybody who's helping me along this process and making my dreams come true and making this all work for me.
All right. So we definitely gonna be back. Right before the book come out. After the book come out, we're gonna we got some things in the works. So you know, don't believe me, just watch.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
with
Thank you
that.
for your time. You know what I'm saying?
I appreciate you,
All right.
bro.
Happy born day to mom over there. You understand? Let me
Yeah,
say it so I can get myself right. You know what I mean? And blessings to y'all, and it's always love.
And
So we
shout
out
out
of here,
to
fam. We about
Prince
to
for
wrap it
coming
up.
on. I mean,
Yeah. Shout out to Prince.
yeah, shout out to Ben. Indeed. All right, Nas, I appreciate it, bro. It's been a good one.
All right.
Peace.
Peace.